Welcome to the deep dive. If you're looking for a shortcut to being well informed, you're definitely in the right place.
Mhm.
Today, we're diving deep into a stack of recent sources, all from June 18th, 2025.
Right.
Our mission, well, it's to pull out the most important nuggets, the surprising facts from the day's big global and U.S. news.
And maybe just enough humor to keep you hooked.
Hopefully. Okay,
It-
let's unpack this.
And our goal really is to help you synthesize all this information, spot patterns, maybe things you'd otherwise miss,
Right.
and understand not just what happened, but fundamentally why it matters, giving you that broader context, those implications.
Okay, first up, we really have to talk about this precarious situation unfolding between Israel and Iran. Tensions have hit a really perilous height this June.
Yeah.
Israel launched what sources are calling its most extensive attacks on Iranian soil since 1979.
Wow, since 79.
Yeah, targeting nuclear and military sites. And this follows Iran's drone and missile attack on Israel back in October 2024.
And what's, particularly alarming is how quickly it all escalated. De-escalation talks, they were scheduled, right? In Oman.
That's right, June 15th.
They completely collapsed. And Israeli operations, they'd already been ramping up since June 13th. Then, bang! June 18th, Israel strikes Iran's only operating nuclear power plant in Tehran.
The only operating one.
Yeah, and this came after a week that sources say decimated Iran's upper military ranks and did significant damage to their nuclear infrastructure already.
And then you have the U.S. angle.
Yeah.
President Trump, he seemed hesitant at first, but then publicly threatened unconditional surrender from Iran,
Right.
even signaling possible U.S. airstrike involvement alongside Israel. Apparently, he told Prime Minister Netanyahu to keep going.
That kind of direct encouragement, that really raises the stakes for everyone involved, doesn't it?
You think? How does that play out with others, like Russia?
Well, you see, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he issued this stark warning on June 18th, first public appearance since this phase started, said any U.S. strike would cause irreparable harm, basically signaling Iran's ready to escalate further.
Right.
And meanwhile, Russia chimed in, cautioning that U.S. involvement would dangerously destabilize the whole region.
So Moscow's doing that balancing act again.
Exactly. Condemning Iran's nuclear ambitions, sure, but also pushing back against U.S. military expansion. It's a tricky line they're walking.
So the immediate fallout, what are we seeing?
Well, predictably, a dramatic rise in regional instability, lots of fear about a broader war breaking out.
And the markets must be reacting.
Oh, yeah. Crude oil prices up 14% in just a week.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder, right?
Okay.
When diplomacy fails, your gas tank feels it. And global stocks are definitely showing caution.
So what's fascinating here is how quickly that rhetoric, turns into real-world market shifts and, frankly, international alarm.
Absolutely. It's that geopolitical risk premium in action. Investors start pricing in worst-case scenarios almost immediately.
And amidst all this, you've got the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issuing a pretty stern warning on the 18th.
Urging all nations, basically, stay out of it militarily, don't get directly involved.
Yeah, he emphasized it could spiral into a catastrophic regional war.
His spokesperson, Dujarric, seemed to be aiming that message partly at Washington.
Right, didn't name names, but yeah, the implication was there, especially with the escalating rhetoric. And U.S. defense officials confirmed they're ready if orders come down.
That's right. And regional powers, think Jordan, Egypt, they're also urging restraint, echoing what diplomats are warning about wider involvement.
Okay, so that's the international picture. But these things always echo back home, don't they?
Absolutely.
A Washington Post poll published June 18th surveyed 1,000 Americans, and it found deep divisions over potentially striking Iran. Here's where it gets really interesting.
What's driving that division? It seems generational.
It really does. The poll shows older folks and Republicans leaning more towards approving military action,
Okay.
while younger people and Democrats tend to remain opposed.
And what are the main concerns for those who are opposed?
Well, the big ones are, getting dragged into another broader war, a long-term presence there, and maybe some skepticism about the intelligence on Iran's nuclear program.
Right, the credibility factor.
Yeah.
And lawmakers are already using this poll data.
Yeah, reportedly referencing it in Senate debates already.
It just raises that important question, doesn't it? How does public opinion, even when it's split like this, actually influence foreign policy decisions in a democracy?
It's a critical dynamic, and while these flashpoints flare, the human cost of conflict just continues. Ukraine.
Yeah, tragic news from Kyiv.
A devastating Russian missile strike on June 18th killed at least 28 people, injured over 130.
Horrific.
A 9-story residential building was just destroyed. Sources say it's the deadliest attack on the capital this year.
And the context here, sadly, is that Russia has repeatedly targeted civilian areas since February 2022. It seems aimed at breaking Ukraine's resolve.
The images were just harrowing.
Oh.
Debris, rescuers everywhere.
Yeah. And the international response came quickly. You had the EU's Kaja Kallas, NATO's Mark Rutte, both reaffirming calls for sustained support.
Right, emphasizing that scaling back aid just emboldens Moscow.
But this strike, it also reignited debates within the Western alliance, didn't it?
It did, and tensions flared up, especially with Ukrainian officials criticizing President Trump for being absent from some urgent G7 talks happening around the same time.
So what does this all mean, for the future of international support and just the enduring human cost?
Yeah.
Especially with those internal Western disagreements bubbling up again.
Okay, let's shift focus now from those international flashpoints to some key developments here in the U.S., starting with the Supreme Court.
Right.
On June 18th, they handed down a decision upholding Tennessee's law, the one banning gender-affirming medical care for minors. It was a 6-3 decision.
Yeah, and this is it's highly controversial, isn't it? Because the American medical community, by and large, actually supports access to this kind of care under strict guidelines, of course.
So what was the court's reasoning?
Well, the majority opinion focused on the authority of state legislatures to regulate medical practices.
Okay.
But the dissenting justices warned pretty strongly that this undermines the rights of transgender youth.
And the reaction? Sharply divided, I imagine.
Absolutely. You hear everything from necessary safeguard on one side to harmful discrimination on the other. And states are already moving, pushing new legislation in response on both sides.
It really highlights that ongoing tension, between states' rights and individual liberties, particularly in these rapidly evolving social areas.
That's right.
Then, separate case, but also significant, a federal judge in Boston, also on June 18th, ordered the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, to restore over $1 billion in research grants.
$1 billion. Wow. What were those grants for?
They'd been cut by the Trump administration, and the funds specifically targeted projects related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and gender identity studies.
Okay, so politically charged areas.
Yeah.
And the judge.
Judge William Young. He didn't mince words. He characterized the administration's actions as, quote, racial discrimination and part of a wider anti-LGBTQ bias. Pretty strong language from the bench.
Very strong. What was the administration's defense?
They argued it was just, reallocating funds, but the judge flatly rejected that.
I see.
So the order is to reinstate the funds while any appeals proceed.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how the judiciary is right in the middle, navigating this complex intersection of state authority, federal funding, individual rights, and the politicization of science and social issues.
Definitely a space to watch. Now let's talk environment. Reports on June 18th point to a pretty major shift at the EPA.
Wow.
Administrator Lee Zeldin apparently directed staff to stop enforcement actions against fossil fuel companies in the Midwest and southern states.
Stop enforcement. That sounds significant.
It's being called part of the largest deregulation effort in EPA history.
Wow. And wasn't there something else about power plant emissions?
Yes, exactly. The EPA also proposed repealing all greenhouse gas emission standards for fossil fuel-fired power plants. That was actually announced a bit earlier, June 11th.
Repealing all greenhouse gas standards. What's the justification?
The agency's argument is that those emissions don't significantly contribute to dangerous air pollution.
But isn't there a massive body of scientific evidence saying the opposite, especially regarding climate change?
Absolutely. And as you'd expect, this has sparked fierce opposition. Environmental groups, Democratic lawmakers are up in arms.
Well, the industry is probably welcoming it.
Largely, yes. It's a huge rollback.
Even if it's politically driven, this kind of broad deregulation, it feels like it might just be pushing future environmental costs onto communities down the line, right?
That's the core argument from critics. And speaking of communities and environmental justice, the NAACP filed a lawsuit on June 18th.
Okay, against who?
Against Elon Musk's XAI, over a new data center they built in Memphis.
What's the issue there? Well, they're alleging violations of the Clean Air Act. Specifically, operating 35 methane gas turbine generators near a predominantly black neighborhood without the proper permits.
Methane turbines. Near homes?
Yeah. The NAACP says this disproportionately exposes residents to toxic emissions and calls it a clear example of environmental racism.
So where minority communities bear the brunt of pollution?
Precisely. In this case, it could set a really important precedent for stronger oversight, especially for tech infrastructure and its impact on, vulnerable communities.
Raises a big question, doesn't it? How do these sweeping policy changes and these legal challenges impact not just community health, but the whole climate trajectory?
It's a crucial question.
Okay, let's pivot again. Immigration enforcement and some pretty serious surveillance concerns came up on June 18th.
Right.
First, two high-profile ICE arrests caught attention. NYC Comptroller Brad Lander, he's a prominent progressive, was actually arrested
Arrested? Where?
at a Manhattan immigration court. He was there assisting a detainee, disputed the agent's authority, and they arrested him, held him for hours.
Wow. And wasn't there something in L.A. too?
Yes, the day before, June 17th, ICE agents conducted raids in Pico Rivera, Los Angeles, even inside a Walmart.
Inside a Walmart.
Yeah, detaining several people. Reports say at least one was a U.S. citizen. And there's video footage showing agents with assault rifles pointed.
That sounds intense. And definitely likely to reignite debates.
Oh, absolutely. Debates over ICE's authority, local rights, especially in sanctuary cities, and immigrant protections. It's really energized progressive groups.
And this connects maybe to wider surveillance worries, something about Palantir.
Exactly. Also on June 18th, 10 Democratic lawmakers sent a letter to Palantir's CEO, Alex Karp.
Okay, about what?
They're demanding information about what they called a government-wide searchable mega database.
A mega database. Integrating what kind of data?
Sensitive tax info, other government data streams. They literally called it a surveillance nightmare.
Worried it could be used against political opponents.
That's the explicit fear raised in the letter.
So what does this all mean, for that balance? National security versus civil liberties, individual privacy, especially as everything gets more digitized.
It's the central tension, isn't it? And these events just throw it into sharp relief. #tag the economic landscape, social debates, and sporting triumphs. All right, let's check in on the economic landscape. U.S. markets on June 18th, kind of quiet.
Yeah, little movement was the phrase used. Investors seem to be weighing signals from the Fed against all this geopolitical uncertainty we've been talking about.
The S&P 500 finished pretty much flat.
Virtually unchanged, yeah. Fed Chair Jerome Powell hinted at maybe 2 rate cuts this year, but the timing is still, vague. Economic indicators were a mixed bag.
Any sectors moving?
Oil stocks were up, reflecting that geopolitical risk. But interestingly, growth-oriented tech shares also continued their climb. So kind of a split picture.
Okay, corporate news. The furniture chain At Home filed for bankruptcy.
Chapter 11, yeah. That was actually on June 16th, but the ripples were felt in the markets on the 18th.
Chapter 11. That's the reorganization one, right? Not liquidation.
Exactly. They get some breathing room to restructure their finances.
What went wrong for them?
Sounds like a perfect storm. Rising tariffs on Chinese imports hit them hard, supply chain disruptions, and then just declining demand from shoppers dealing with inflation. Analysts are calling it a potential bellwether for the retail sector.
Right.
And it's definitely fueling debate about whether some of these tariff policies might be backfiring.
Yeah, it shows how those big macro pressures hit specific companies hard.
Definitely.
Okay, another big deal finalized. Nippon Steel, the Japanese industrial giant. Their acquisition of U.S. Steel finally went through on June 18th.
Ah, yes, the $14.9 billion deal. That took a while, right? 18 months of review.
It did. What are the key terms?
Well, importantly, the agreement keeps the U.S. Steel brand and headquarters in Pittsburgh.
Okay, good for Pittsburgh.
And it includes an interesting provision. A U.S. government option to veto future business decisions.
Oversight. What do economists think?
Some suggest it could encourage more foreign investment in American manufacturing. Labor groups seem cautiously optimistic about job stability. It's a real mix of corporate strategy, national interest, and worker impact.
Now, here's a report that really made me pause. From June 2025, the world's 65 largest banks committed nearly $900 billion to fossil fuel projects in the previous year alone.
$900 billion. How does that compare?
That's a 23% increase over 2023. And it brings the total since the Paris Climate Deal to almost $7.9 trillion.
Brilliant. Wow. That's staggering, especially given all the climate pledges.
Right. Predictably, environmentalists are slamming it as greenwashing.
Making eco-friendly claims while funding fossil fuels.
Exactly. While the industry pushes back, saying fossil fuels are still essential for energy security. It's a huge clash between rhetoric and reality in climate finance.
A massive clash.
And quickly on crypto markets were apparently roiled in June 2025. Why?
A regulatory crackdown. It seems major economies announced coordinated enforcement actions.
Charging one.
Unregistered crypto exchanges, illicit activities, stuff like that led to sharp drops in value for many cryptocurrencies.
So the crypto community must be debating this heavily.
Oh, yeah. Divided, as usual. Some advocates say clear rules are needed to protect consumers. Others warn that too much regulation could stifle innovation.
It really underscores how tangled everything is, doesn't it? Global economics, policy decisions, geopolitics, even environmental promises.
It's an incredibly complex web.
Okay, let's do a rapid round. A lot of other important stuff happened on June 18th. A severe heat wave hit the I-95 corridor.
Yeah, heat index over 100 degrees Fahrenheit expected.
Which actually caused logistical concerns for early mayoral primary voting in New York City, and experts are linking it to climate change.
And globally, a natural disaster. Indonesia's Mount Merapi erupted violently on the 18th, forced thousands to evacuate. Big risks to health and infrastructure there.
Then a high-profile trial verdict came down. Finance analyst Karen Reed.
Ah, the Boston case. Acquitted of second-degree murder in her boyfriend, police officer John O'Keefe's death.
Right, found guilty only of drunk driving. Why the acquittal on the murder charge?
The verdict cited gaps in the forensic evidence and significantly allegations of misconduct against one of the investigators, Detective Michael Proctor.
And the public reaction.
Intense. Lots of social media support for Reed. Legal experts are saying the verdict shows how, quote, shaky evidence procedures can lead to acquittals, sparking calls for better oversight of police investigations.
Quite a verdict. Then a really tragic story highlighting the abortion ban controversy. A Georgia woman, Adriana Smith.
Yes, declared brain dead.
But kept on life support against her family's wishes for nearly 4 months because of the state's abortion ban. She eventually gave birth via emergency C-section.
Her mother called the whole ordeal torture. It was just reignited those intense debates about abortion rights, bodily autonomy, and the government's role in these deeply personal medical situations.
It's heartbreaking. Back in Washington, Senate Republicans advanced a bill on the 18th, aiming for deep cuts to Medicaid.
And tightening eligibility requirements, yeah. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer warned it could mean over 16 million people losing coverage.
And hundreds of hospitals potentially closing. Huge potential impact.
Huge. And another somber note. Saudi Arabia executed a prominent journalist, Turki Al-Jasser, on June 18th.
He'd been in prison since 2018, right, on charges widely seen as fabricated.
That's right. Drew immediate international outcry and fresh calls for sanctions against Saudi Arabia.
Okay, let's end the rapid round on a much-needed, lighter note. Sports.
Please.
The Florida Panthers. They clinched their first ever Stanley Cup championship on June 18th.
Yes. Defeated the Edmonton Oilers in a dramatic Game 7.
Historic milestone for the franchise. Huge celebrations down in Florida, I bet.
You gotta love a Game 7 clincher. A great moment of collective joy amidst everything else.
It really raises an important question, though, doesn't it? How do all these seemingly disparate events, from court cases and policy fights to global sports wins, how do they paint a complete picture of the challenges but also the resilience that we see in the world right now?
It's the whole tapestry, isn't it? The good, the bad, the complicated. Hashtag tag outro.
So we have covered an incredible amount of ground today. This deep dive into June 18th, 2025, from those escalating global conflicts, major domestic policy shifts, deeply personal stories, even that Stanley Cup win. It's really striking how much can happen in just one day.
It really is. And what it all means, I think, is that knowledge, information is most valuable when you can actually understand it, maybe apply it.
Right.
So we always encourage you, the listener, keep questioning assumptions, consider different viewpoints, because we connect these dots. Look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It becomes clearer how seemingly unrelated events often influence each other, sometimes in really profound ways, shaping our world in directions we might not expect.
So here's a final thought for you to reflect on. As you consider the sheer volume and variety of critical news from just this single day we impact. Think about how this interconnectedness, global conflicts, shifting domestic policies here, technological leaps, how it's all rapidly redefining our basic notions of security, of rights, of societal well-being.
Yeah.
What implications do all these events, when you view them together, have for the long-term stability and maybe the direction of both global communities and your own local communities? Something to think about.